So you want to get your pilot's license, but you're not sure exactly how much it's going to cost, how much time it's going to take, the criteria, and so on and so forth. What's up, guys? My name is Peter. I'm an airline pilot, currently flying the Boeing 767 all around the world for a legacy carrier, and I'm here to answer the most commonly asked questions that I get from people that want to get started in flying. So whether or not you're trying to get your pilot's license so you can fly around for fun as a hobby with your family and friends, or maybe you aspire to be an airline pilot one day, I hope some of the information that I can give you will help you along the way. First step in becoming an airline pilot or just getting your license in general is to get your PPL, or Private Pilot's License. This license allows you to fly small single-engine aircraft pretty much all around the world with your family and friends. Still, it's one of the biggest accomplishments that I know a lot of people are super proud of, including myself. So the criteria to get your PPL, or Private Pilot's License. The FAA, or Federal Aviation Administration, require the pilot to have 40 flight hours in order to get your license. Now, 40 hours is the bare minimum. I'm here to tell you right now, not many people do it in 40 hours. The national average is closer to about 65 or 70 hours. I myself did it right in that average, right around 65 hours. As a flight instructor, I had a student, lowest hours I believe was like 43 hours. Shout out Zach, if you're watching this video. Awesome job, bud. Hope all is well. Also had a student that took quite a bit of hours, around 120, to get their private pilot's license. It's not like they lack the skill. It's just as I get further into this video, you'll see that not sticking with your training and continuing to being proficient will really hinder your progress. So 40 hours of flight time is required. Within those hours, you have to show proficiency in a various amount of maneuvers. Takeoffs and landings, crosswind takeoffs, maneuvers such as stalls, steep turns, slow flight. Also, you'll have to show proficiency in emergency procedures. What happens if your engine fails? What happens if your wing catches on fire? Things such as that. Along with the 40 hours, the proficiency maneuvers, you'll have to pass 3 tests. The first is an FAA written test, or multiple choice computer test. The next is your FAA check ride, which gets broken down into 2 parts. Your FAA check ride first will consist of an oral exam given to you by the examiner. That exam is usually around 30 to 45 minutes, maybe even as much as an hour and a half, depending on the examiner. The next is going to be your flight test. That flight is usually around an hour, hour and a half, and they go through all those maneuvers that I spoke about, plus some simulated emergencies and other things that your instructor will teach you how to not only do, but do correctly. Once you pass those tests, show proficiency in your maneuvers, you're ready to become a pilot. It's that simple. Not exactly. There's a lot of little minute things that are involved during that. But to summarize the criteria, minimum 40 hours of flight time, pass 3 different FAA tests, show proficiency in those maneuvers, and also make sure you can pass an aviation medical exam to make sure you're fit for flight. Next topic I'm going to get into is probably the one that I get asked the most, is cost, right? Money. It's no lie. Flying is expensive. Planes are expensive to build, expensive to own, expensive to fix, expensive to fuel up. All these costs come down to the student who's learning how to fly. I'm going to give you my breakdown of what it costs me and the hours it took me. I just want to preface it by saying this can vary greatly. The biggest factor probably not only is the individual and how many hours it takes them, but also where you live. So I got my PPL, or Private Pilot's License, in the New York City metropolitan area, where things are just more expensive. Cost of my airplane, the cost for the flight instructor, cost of living is more expensive. So just like anything else in the world, it gets passed down to the consumer. Breakdown of what it cost me to get my Private Pilot's License. The airplane itself, which was a Cessna 172, which is a very, very common first airplane to fly, 4-seater, high wing, single engine airplane, costs $155 an hour wet. What wet means is that fuel is included. It wasn't a separate charge. Some flight schools charge their aircraft rentals dry, meaning fuel is not included. So it might be $100 dry, but then you got to fill it up for 60 bucks, which is going to be 160 an hour. So you want to make sure to ask the flight school if it's a wet or dry rate. The next big cost is the flight instructor themselves. He or she obviously needs to get paid. My flight school at the time charged $75 an hour for me to use their services. So $155 an hour for the airplane, $75 an hour for the flight instructor, looking at $230 an hour whenever I went up with my flight instructor to go flying. I had 35 hours of dual given, meaning I had 35 hours with the flight instructor sitting next to me and me also in the plane, them teaching me all these different maneuvers that I needed to learn, also supervising me as I got more proficient in them. 35 hours of dual given cost $8,050, approximately $8,000 for just those 35 hours. I also had 30 hours of solo flight. So there was no flight instructor next to me. I was flying the airplane by myself. I obviously didn't have to pay for their services. I just paid for the aircraft rental. That was 30 hours times 155, if my math is correct, $4,650. That was my 65 hours of flight time. However, you also have to learn not only how to physically fly the plane, but the rules that are associated with that. Federal aviation regulations, basically rules of the sky. Just like when you're driving, you have to know stop sign, green light, red light, yellow light. There are rules up in the sky as well that you have to know and abide by. That training is done in the classroom setting. So I had about 15 hours of ground school times $75 an hour for that instructor. That came to $1,125. Last but not least, miscellaneous. So the FAA written test, the examiner fee, headset, flight charts, these all cost money. I rounded it up to about $1,000 for all those items, bringing my grand total to get my private pilot's license to $15,000. Again, I just want to reiterate, that was for me personally. It could be a lot less, it could be a lot more, depending on where you get your license and also how proficient you are and how quickly you get it. The next big question I get asked all the time is, how much time is this going to cost me to get my license? Again, this is going to vary greatly depending on the individual, but I'm going to give you a breakdown that hopefully helps. So each flying lesson is between 1.0 and 2.0 hours. Yes, we do count flying hours by the decimal. Every 0.1 equals 6 minutes. So some flight lessons are 0.9, some flight lessons are 1.4. That's how we calculate your hours. So if the average flight lesson is 1.5 hours, you're looking at about 40 to 50 lessons to get your license. So simple math, it's going to take you 52 lessons and you're only coming to the flight school once a week, 52 weeks in a year, last time I checked, you're going to be looking at about a year to complete your license. However, if you're more of a eager, passionate student, you can get your 40 or 50 lessons done in a month or two. I personally did my private pilot's license from start to finish in about 2.5 months. That was going to the flight school about 3 to 5 times a week, depending on the week and my personal schedule. Again, I had students that could only make it once a week. So their progression took a little bit more time, cost them a little bit more money, but they were eventually able to get it in a year and a half. Average lesson, like I said before, is about an hour and a half. That includes 15 to 30 minutes of pre-brief, which pre-brief is just going over what you're going to do that day, and then a debrief. At the end of the lesson, most instructors are going to tell you what you did good, what you need to improve on, and the thing that you're going to do next time you come to your lesson. So you're looking at anywhere from 2.5 to 3 hours as far as how long you're actually going to be at the flight school. But Pete, what if it's a bad weather day and I can't go flying? That's a great question. Hopefully, your flight school has a flight simulator that they're able to utilize on bad weather days, so you can still practice your maneuvers even when it's not a good day to go flying. They don't have a flight simulator, that's okay. It's a great idea to utilize that time to learn that ground school knowledge. Just like any other skill out there in the entire world, the more you put into it, the more you stick with it, the quicker you're going to progress and the quicker you're going to compound those skills in order to become a successful private pilot. So you're still here. It means you want to learn where to start. That could be a big obstacle for a lot of people. Simple Google search or FAA.gov, you got to find your local flight school. So depending on where you live, you're going to have to find an airport that has a flight school. Normally, it's not going to be a major international airport like LAX or JFK. It's going to be a smaller general aviation flight school. You're going to give that flight school a call and book a discovery flight. What a discovery flight is an introductory flight to flying. You might be really passionate about flying because you travel a lot or you watch air disasters on TV, but you don't really know what it's like to fly an airplane yet. So do yourself a favor, book this flight to make sure it's something that you actually like. This flight is usually between 45 minutes to an hour and costs anywhere from $150 to $300 depending on that flight school. On that flight, they're going to show you just basic principles of flight, maybe some maneuvers, fly over your house depending on where you live, and just again, seeing if you're comfortable flying the airplane. Good news is if you enjoyed that flight and you want to continue with flight lessons, that flight time will actually count towards your FAA minimum of 40 hours to get your private pilot's license. After that flight, you'll sit down with the flight instructor and they're going to go over approximate cost, their schedule, your schedule, and kind of everything in between of what you're going to need in order to get your private pilot's license. Now you're ready to book your first flight. One thing they will tell you though is what I mentioned earlier, you're going to need an FAA medical exam. So I'm not going to get into too many details, but you need a third class medical, costs around $100, $150 depending on your doctor. I have to go to a special AME or aviation medical examiner to obtain this certificate. Last but not least, here are some money saving tips that I wish I personally knew prior to starting flight school that I hope you can utilize. First, ask the flight school if they have any prepaid or flight hour packages, meaning if you prepay up front for 10, 20, 30 hours, maybe they bundle in a few, 2, 3, 5 hours for free of charge. Might not sound like a lot, but it's expensive. It'll help in the long run. If you're fortunate enough to have a lot of airports in your area to pick from, I highly suggest you pick an airport that has a long enough runway to do touch and goes. I know you don't know what that means necessarily yet, but an airport that allows you to do takeoffs and landings in one fell swoop will help you get proficient at takeoffs and landings quicker. The quicker you learn how to do that, the more money you save. Also, if you're lucky enough to have multiple airports in your area, pick an airport that's not so busy. What I mean by that is when you're taxiing out for takeoff and you have to sit in line behind 2, 3, 4, 10 airplanes before you take off, that airplane engine is spinning, you're getting charged, it's going to end up costing you more and not really learning much while you're on the ground. So a less busy airport where you can just crank the engine, do your pre-flight checks, take off and start practicing will help save you money in the long run as well. Chair fly, chair fly, chair fly. Sounds silly, but once you do start to learn the maneuvers and you're getting proficient at them, while you're home, in the car ride on the way to the airport, on the car ride home from the airport, when you're sitting at dinner table before mom puts down the spaghetti and meatballs, pretend like you're flying the airplane and rehearse the maneuvers in your chair. Even as an airline pilot flying a 767, I still do this for some of my procedures and my maneuvers to this day. If you rehearse your maneuvers prior to each lesson, you're going to be so much more prepared. The more you're prepared, the more proficient you are, the quicker you can move on to the next step, the more money you'll save. Last, but certainly not least, and this is, I personally think, the biggest mistake that people make, have the money and the time prior to starting your training. What I mean by that is if the flight training is going to cost $10,000, have the $10,000. The worst thing you can do is get halfway through your training, run out of funds, have to take a 2, 3, 5 month hiatus. Flying is not like riding a bike. You're not going to just pick up where you're left off. You're going to have to end up repeating a lot of those maneuvers, more hours, more money. So have the funds up front if possible so you can go from start to finish. I had a few students that had to stop halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, and it crushed me every time because when they came back, it wasn't like they picked it right up from where they left off. They had to repeat some of the maneuvers, the takeoffs, the landings, ended up costing them even more in the long run. All right, that's how you get your private pilot's license in a nutshell. As an airline pilot who's been through it, I kid you not, it's still to this day my biggest professional accomplishment is getting that license. It's an awesome feeling to take up your family and friends. I ended up turning it into a career. Maybe it's something that you might want to end up doing too. If you like this video even a little bit, just hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Comments, questions below, I'd be happy to answer. Find me on Instagram and TikTok, pilotpete.fly. Happy to answer any of those questions in my DMs or anywhere I find you. Again, hope you enjoyed and talk to you soon.